Okay, we're back. So if you were just picking up from the earlier video, I lost contact with the material I had in front of me. I don't know why it disappeared. And so you heard me fumbling around there for about 30 seconds. Sorry about that. You were probably laughing, as was I after I realized what happened. But in any case, we're back, and thank you for joining me again. And so we were talking about wind, and looking at some um, of the information about it. And it's wind is something that has seen huge growth. It One thing to make a note of is that it now surpasses hydroelectric production in the United States. That happened maybe a year and a half ago, I think, is when it did that. So that's pretty remarkable. One of the things about wind is it's more for the masses in the sense that how many places can you really build hydro dams on? They have to be rivers. Let's start with that, and they have to be just right in rivers, and it's really complicated. So there's really not that. If you look at the total surface area of the United States and rivers, not very big. Yes, it can get a lot of power out of wind, but with wind, on the other hand, you can cover vast landscapes, especially in areas where there's not a lot of folks around. Um, and so it's become a big industry in very windy spots of the United States, like the Midwest. So some of the so going a little more about the pros, it can become at least 20% or more of the grid load in the Northwest, and some is sold in fixed price future contracts, as we mentioned earlier. It's clean relative to the fossil fuels, at least. It improves rural employment and the tax base. The farmers and ranchers that have turbines get a fixed contract with those. Every year they get that check, and it's a lot more in some of those windswept hilly areas than they would get. They get in grazing, but the nice thing is they can still have those economic activities going on at the same time. There is a little disruption where the roads end, but it's a pretty minor part. And the other thing is, once you build a wind farm, you can come in later in some cases and build larger turbines. And so now most of the Northwest ones I think are in the 3 or 4 megawatt size. And some of the big ones now they're building, in some places are getting up to 8 megawatts. Some of the offshore ones are even 10 or 12. Some of them have turbine, the blades sweep as high as 500 to 600 feet above the ground, if you can imagine that. They're just giant things. Okay, and there's no fuel cost. Um, so the downsides is, well, yeah, doesn't always it's not always windy. Some groups have organized against wind farms. They don't like to look at them, and the visual nuisance, and also just some people complain that the sound and vibrations and so on annoy them, and I'm nobody to question that. Um, they probably affect some people differently than others. I don't think there's really any doubt about that. It's like any kind of energy. There's a lot of money up front, but really it's the whole cost up front. It's not like a nuclear plant or like a coal-fired plant or a natural gas plant where you also have to keep buying fuel. It's all right up front, but then the operational costs are modest. Okay, there have been some raptor mortalities, bird mortalities in some areas, so that's being managed. But the Audubon Society came out with a statement. They're the great protector of birds, right? And they have said that they would far prefer wind farms, if properly sited, than they would building new coal plants. Interesting statement. There was some dissension on that, I understand, but in any case, bird mortality. It's a lot of it's just siting so that you don't put them in the flyways, and the larger sweep of the blades as well. Apparently, is less likely to cause mortality than the smaller, shorter ones that had a higher uh, uh, revolutions per minute. Um, Geothermal is baseload electricity, where it's used to generate electricity where the real high concentrations of heat, or just heating itself for buildings and so on. It's real expensive to build baseload electric plants with geothermal, apparently because there's not very many of them. There's a big one in Northern California. There's been some experimenting around the Pacific Northwest. It's very capital intensive, and it just hasn't taken off. It is a clean kind of energy. There's also been some evidence of exhaustion of the geothermal resources, not that they totally go away, but they can be depleted some and operate at a lower level afterwards in some resource settings. So don't know where that's going to go. Hasn't really grown much. Solar thermal, photovoltaic, and passive solar. Solar thermal is where you like we talked about some of that earlier, but where you heat up a building or water, that sort of thing. Or if you heat water enough to make steam, you can actually spin a turbine and make electricity. So that's another application. They're doing that in some desert areas. There's the photovoltaic PV, which has gotten much cheaper because of mass manufacturing. And it's kind of a long story with that, but it's kind of an amazing story too. And then there's passive solar, which is a kind of solar thermal in a way, in that if you design your home properly, you can save a lot of money on your utility bills. So the photovoltaic comes in at 3 to 20 cents an hour. That's and wind, by the way, has fallen below 4. I should probably go change that. It's some places now it's 3-ish too. And so solar, photovoltaic, and wind are roughly the same cost of generation nowadays. Okay. What I'm going to do is go show you something about wind, though I forgot to do this earlier before we get in more to solar. The Pacific Northwest, I look at Washington data and Oregon, and it's stalled since like 2012, 13. There really hasn't been much going on since then. And so I looked at it in the West here, which would include Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, and California, I believe. I'm not sure what other states technically play into that. I think probably Utah, Nevada, and so on as well. But in any case, if you look at the West, we had some big years of wind here. See how big additions all the way up through 2012, but it just fell to nothing and did recover some, but very little really if you look at the green there. Where's the action now? Interior, yeah, the Midwest, huge. Look at this. And so what's partially happened is this was mostly political. There's a subsidy that's been applied to wind in some years to encourage it to come along, to compete better, back when it wasn't so cheap. And then, so depending on who's in charge of the politics of that, I'm not going to get into the specifics, but if you're interested to do some research in that, you're more than welcome to. But it has varied. So when the tax credit's taken away, you get the industry falls off the cliff, which is kind of hard to build an industry when, can you imagine the job base here and what happens to the jobs here? It's a disaster, an absolute disaster, okay? And so that's a hard way. You know, the oil, this is a point to make. The fossil fuel subsidies, especially to the oil and gas industry, are constant. The policy environment is stable, and they can plan on it. For some reason, wind and solar have been a political football for a long time. Increasingly, though, what's happened is the market has driven us more than the subsidies from the government to help out. In other words, it's just because of the cost. And let me show you what I mean by this. It's kind of amazing stuff. Look at this graph. Okay, so this is the levelized cost of energy comparison. And this is unsubsidized without government help. In other words, just pure investors trying to make money. And so you get these different kinds of power generation. And just to show you, I can't seem to get both on the screen here without zooming down, but I don't want to make the print smaller. I know it's going to be hard for you to see. But this is unsubsidized. Okay, so you got that? All right, so here you go. So if you look at this, these are the levelized cost of producing a megawatt hour of electricity. So solar is, if you're a rooftop, it's somewhere in this ballpark. But if you're a utility scale, like the big farms where they have tons of, there's many acres, look at the price of solar here. It's like $30 to $40 a megawatt. Wind, same kind of ballpark, a wider range, though. Really amazing story, especially when you say, what does it cost to do a nuclear plant or to make electricity with a coal plant. If you build a new plant, this is a new coal plant. This is what it costs when you add in the cost of building the plant and amortizing that over time, like a mortgage would be, and then also buying the fuel, which is how you operate it. The cheapest that can be done, and this was last year, I believe, is somewhere in this range of 65 to 159. A gas peaking plant, one that you can just turn on and off. It's basically a big aircraft engine that runs on gas, natural gas, that is, not gasoline. They're expensive, but that's just for filling in little gaps. And the combined cycle ones are larger plants, and those have a, if you build a new one, including the fuel costs, you can produce electricity somewhere between $44 and $73. If you're just doing it with a plant that's paid off and you're just buying the fuel and no cost of building a new plant and amortizing that in on a yearly basis, this is what it costs to make electricity in this range. So what we see here is that wind now can compete and electricity can compete with these fossil fuels. So that's a story in itself, unsubsidized, okay? So what I want to do is tell you a little, or show you a little bit of how that happened. There's these graphs here are just amazing. Look at this. This is historical renewable energy levelized cost of energy declines, okay, through time. In other words, look at this. It'll be in 2009 on both sides, here and here, 2020. Look at the change, okay, for wind. Again, this is wind. In 2009, when most of you were pretty young people, very young, look at this. From roughly, whatever that is, $140 as an average, something like that, per megawatt hour. Look at that. And this is the range, like in the very best conditions, this, not quite such good conditions of finance or geography, that, okay? Look at the decline. The wind is leveled off some. Solar is still, they say, utility scale solar, on the other hand, look where it started and coming down. Now, I got to tell you a little story. Imagine me teaching classes like this and talking about this 10, 11 years ago. It was a hard sell on climate change. Look at this and go, my gosh, it was cheaper to make it with coal or natural gas than to make electricity with either solar or wind. But we had some really big cost declines as mass manufacturing kicked in, technologies kicked in, and especially with solar, although it was way, 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 way more expensive. Let me give you an idea. In my house, it's I pay $85 per megawatt hour, which is 8.5 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, it costs about $40 a megawatt hour to distribute and market it. So basically now, solar in the sunniest parts of the country and wind are both now cost competitive with any kind of energy source. And that's why, interestingly, wind has kept booming. Let me show you the geography of that again. Check it out. In the places where it's really windy, that's where you see those lowest prices, right in here. Okay, it's fantastically cheap to generate wind power nowadays. Not so much in the Northwest. We have wind, but as you can see, we haven't done so well here. And so the question is, well, the Pacific Northwest wind industry revive itself, and I think its future probably lies mostly offshore in our probably 10-year time frame, something like that. Okay, so that's what I would say about wind. We talked about geothermal, and now that's a little bit about solar. How are our resources? Okay, and so we're going to look a little more at the solar resource. And this is the solar resource for Oregon and interior Washington, parts of Idaho, almost